Good morning. I'm John Kelker, past president of the Springfield Citizens Club. Club President Joyce Narduli is out of town, and I was happy to accept her invitation to host our meeting this morning. We have a wonderful program as we reflect on 50 years of the Illinois Times with owner and editor Fletcher Farrar and NPR Illinois with GM Randy Eccles. We are grateful to our community partners and sponsors, WMAY, WUIS, and the audio-visual department of the mayor's office. Thank you also to our coffee sponsors this morning, Fifth Third Wealth Advisors. And as always, the Citizens Club is not responsible for the comments made this morning, and anything shared by our presenters today is not a club position. Be careful, gentlemen. Before we start, I want to remind everyone of our evening program next Tuesday, November 25th, with Senator Doris Turner and Representative Mike Coffey. That will be at 7 p.m. here at the Hoagland in the Peggy Ryder Theater. Our moderator this morning for today's program is Bernie Schoenberg. Most of us know Bernie. You can read his full bio in the email we send out to you. Bernie served as a journalist at the State Journal-Register for 30 years before retiring in December of 2020. He previously worked for the Pantagraph in Bloomington for a decade and the Associated Press in Chicago for 3.5 years. He also shared with me how active he remains in our community, the number of boards he serves on, which were far too many for me to catch during a conversation. But we certainly want to recognize Bernie for how active he is and how involved he's remained in the community. With that, I will let Bernie open our program, and let's find out what's happened at the Illinois Times, NPR, and what's going on in the future.
Thanks, John, and thanks for what you have done for the club and continue to do. I'd like to also thank Karen Witter, who's in the crowd, who helped organize this morning's event, because I am not an organized person. You can ask my wife, Kim, who's here too. So I will just do some quick introductions also from some of the bio material on our couple of guests. Randy Eccles is next to me. Randy became NPR Illinois General Manager in 2013 after serving as Development Director since moving to Springfield in 2008. He served on the Governor's Local Journalism Task Force in 2023 and 24. He is also the past president of the Illinois Public Broadcasting Council, the Association for All Public Media Organizations in Illinois. He previously worked at KTAR in Phoenix and WGN in Chicago, we've heard of that one, in programming and marketing management after producing talk shows and sports coverage. He also worked for high school station at Homewood Flossmoor and college stations at North Central College, where he went, and I guess University of Evansville in Indiana. Born in Hinsdale, Randy was raised by teachers in South Suburban Glenwood, including his dad was a coach, which puts extra pressure on a guy, at Homewood Flossmoor, then North Central College, and spent a lot of time at the family farm in Industry, Illinois, south of Macomb. And he's also served on the Springfield Area Arts Council Board, and we hear him on Community Voices. So welcome. I'll also introduce Fletcher Farrar. We know him mostly as Bud. Graduated from Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University in 1971 in my hometown of Evanston. Then worked as a reporter for daily newspapers before taking over as owner of Illinois Times in 1977. Since then, he has guided the Springfield Weekly newspaper through the change to free circulation, the advent and flourishing of computer technology, the rise and fall of personal ads, including very interesting ones back in the day, the demise of classifieds, and the continuous importance of local news. He is now working, as he will explain, with the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln and the American Journalism Project to move Illinois Times into the nonprofit world in order to add donor support as a funding source. This will allow the Illinois Times to increase its reporting staff, its frequency of publication, and its coverage area. In Springfield, Bud is involved in historic preservation, low-income housing, and improvement of old neighborhoods. He also owns and operates a cattle farm in southern Illinois, the things you find out when you do these programs. He is active in First Church of the Brethren, which supports children, peace, anti-racism, and the LGBTQ community. He is married to Mary Jessup, a retired pastor, and is father of 2 adult daughters, Elizabeth and Ann, and a granddaughter, Sky. I will open it with Randy, who can explain kind of where things have been. We are celebrating today that both of the organizations that these men run are 50 years old. And one is having some interesting changes, Bud, and one is having some interesting changes we've read about on national news. Randy, so tell us how things are going at NPR Illinois.
There was something in the water in 1975, apparently, because we both got going. There was a real need for a different type of journalism. In 1967, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was founded, and LBJ understood that commercialism in particular was a challenge in things like kids television. If you remember Saturday mornings, they'd be selling to kids toys and cereal, and a lot of times it was within the programs itself. And so there was a desire to create something non-commercial. So I'm going to go briefly over some of the basics because I don't assume everybody knows. Most of the time when I've been out, I find there's a lot of the background that's not there. But in 1975, UIS, Sangamon State at the time, was lucky enough and worked hard to get a public radio station, and that was WSSR, because WSSU call letters weren't available at the time. They ended up becoming available eventually, so the station became WSSU, Sangamon State University. And then when the University of Illinois took over Sangamon State University and it became UIS, the station was able to get those call letters and it became WUIS, which it is still today. We brand ourselves as NPR Illinois now because when we talk to people, they always refer to us as NPR. And it just made a little bit more quick recognition when we talked about it. And we've been doing that for about 10 years. You may have come to the Lincoln Library, the public library here in town, back in September for our 50th anniversary celebration. We were very fortunate that the Sangamon Experience had a graduate assistant, Evie Rodenbaugh, who spent the past year going through all of our files, both paper and digital, and finding amazing history of the station. People who got the station going and made it what it is today, which includes tons of donors because it's a nonprofit model, right? So this has been built by you, for you over the years, and a lot of the staff have just been fortunate enough to be able to do that work, and I think most of the time we really appreciate it. News quickly emerged as an important part of what public media does. All Things Considered was the first project that all these little stations around the country got together and helped fund, creating basically NPR as a network. And then eventually that took off so well that Morning Edition was offered. Both of those we cover. Pretty much any public radio station has those two tent poles. And then a lot of other programs that are nationally produced, but also the most important thing for the local stations is to produce local programming. So we do things now like Community Voices, the longtime show that we've had since the beginning, State Week, which is a weekly analysis of politics here in town. Statewide is a story of the best public media journalism in the state. So all those are things that our staff work to do. We are tiny but mighty. We have some really hard-working staff, and I think that's the case in most of these smaller stations. That has been more of a challenge, as you've probably heard, with funding lately. Our funding sources, it was always one of the things that made us strong was we had multiple funding sources. But first, the higher ed across the country is under challenge, just like museums and everything else. So higher ed is having to focus on their main core piece, so we don't get as much cash support from the university as we used to, but we still get a lot of in-kind support, things like rent and power, things like that. So that was the first thing that happened a few years ago. This year, a threat that has been ongoing almost since the beginning of public media was to defund it or reduce the funding, and it happened. There was a lot of outpouring. We went to DC to talk to our congresspeople. They said they've been hearing from you a lot about it, and that helped, but it wasn't enough. For us, we get about $240,000 a year to support the operations of the station, which is somewhere between $1.75 and $2 million a year. We've been told that the cost to replace that funding is really closer to $400,000 because there's some things we didn't get cash for directly that CPB paid for, like music licenses, satellite connection, and different things like that. There's been some news on all these different areas, but it's been a challenge. The stations are working right now on a weekly basis with each other to try to figure out sort of a new model of how to work together and find the right service. We're still here, we're not going away, but that's going to be super dependent on listeners continuing to do what they've done, which is step up and give money. So the nonprofit model seems like the best model around right now for journalism, and congratulations to Bud to getting ready to approach that, but it also has its own challenges. So the other piece that for us right now, there are a lot of things, be happy to answer questions later or tell you about the station. It's amazing, but the other piece is that journalism is under threat. The idea that somebody gets yelled at because they ask a tough question or that they get called names is making it not only so that if there's a chilling effect, but it's also making it so people don't want to go into journalism. The pipeline of finding people to come and study journalism and decide to report and do this hard work for us, the community, is getting harder. You see fewer and fewer journalism students. When we used to have job openings, we would have a pretty good wealth of people to apply. Now, some of those same people pass on taking a position here because they can get it in Chicago or Indianapolis or St. Louis, and they'd rather start off in the big market. So that's the environment of journalism we're in right now. The last thing I'll just tell you before we get to Bud is that the threats have included defunding, which has happened, to public media and investigating of underwriting, which is, they're not commercials, but they're what we're allowed to do to fundraise with businesses. We're able to mention some basic information about them. We've worked with the FCC, the public media realm has worked with the FCC for years to make sure we're in compliance with that, but now this administration and this FCC director is examining it. There are major market stations like WBEZ in Chicago, which they have told us that it is requiring a lot of additional labor to go back and find 2 years worth of scripts and everything else that is involved in that. You also have other types of defunding that has occurred. You have threats to content that we see with other entities. You saw Jimmy Kimmel, you saw Stephen Colbert, you saw CBS make a settlement, you saw ABC make a settlement. The most recent is, I read this morning that the FCC wants to know if BBC ran a particular program on any American stations because they don't like how it was edited. And so they're threatening a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. And as best my knowledge, that is not a program that aired here in this country, but those are the threats and the chilling effect that we're operating in right now.
But
the program is supposed to be mostly on history, I was told. So I was thinking I'd tell some old stories. And you all might remember some of them, but one of the hardest things when I have a new intern and try to show them a thing or two, because I've seen a thing or two, is to put the story into context. When I first started at the Southern Illinoisan as a reporter after I got out of college, the motto down there was check the clips. So young reporters always think they're doing this story this is the first time it's ever been written about. But back at the Southern Illinoisan, well, we had a library and a librarian, and that's where she would take the paper every day and cut it out and put it in an envelope about that topic, and we'd have to go check the clips. Well, even Jeannie, the librarian, she was kind of curmudgeonly, but since I used her library, well, she kind of liked me, but one time, but she always had to clean out these files because she only had so much file space and was adding to it every day. Well, I went to ask her about this, to find the clips on this former congressman down there. Somehow I remember the name. It was Runt Bishop. I wanted to know about Congressman Runt Bishop. Well, it wasn't in there. And she told me, well, he's dead, you know. Like, yeah, so, well, history. That's kind of the way my interns treated history, is like, it's dead, you know. Well, I wanted to talk some about the importance of context. When I was in grad school at Northwestern, I had a magazine writing course, and I did a piece on Dan Walker, and he was governor then, and I came down here and got an interview with Dan Walker. And so he told me, and I thought this was a great quote, you know, he's sitting in the small governor's office outside the big room, and that's what he used as the governor's office. And he said, you know, when I first came here, I worked for Governor Adlai Stevenson, and I was on his staff, and you know, he traveled a lot. He was campaigning for president, and I ran the office when he was out traveling. And I thought, man, that's a great quote. So I put that in my article that I turned in for my magazine writing course. Well, my professor was John Bartlow Martin, who was a writer for Saturday Evening Post, but also was the biographer of Adlai Stevenson. He wrote the big 2-volume biography of Governor Adlai Stevenson. And he wrote big red letters on my paper, says Dan Walker did not run the office when Adlai Stevenson was out of town. So I forgot to check the clips on that one. But I was thinking of some history of Illinois Times, and one of the themes that I came up with was smoke. There are several smoke stories that I wanted to string together. One is that we used to go out of our way, and maybe some of you remember this, to accommodate smokers in the office. And they were always our best people. I remember Peggy Boyer used to smoke those cigarillos, you know, and she was the best writer, so I did everything I could to stand her smoke. And then we had an ad salesperson who sold the most and had the best clients, and she was a smoker. And so I went out of my way to set up a ventilation system, put a fan behind her desk, and so she could smoke in the office. Well, things have changed, thank goodness. And now the people we hire don't smoke until after they're hired, so we don't know about it. But they always have to go out in the parking lot now, so that's a thing. And then another smoke story was about burning leaves. Ossie Langfelder was mayor, and he thought it was such a romantic thing to have the sky filled with smoke in autumn. It was just one of the signs of autumn, that a romantic thing. And then Ann Doherty decided she'd had enough and told us all about secondhand smoke, and went on a campaign and got petitions, went to city council, and finally, I don't know how the vote went, but finally we banned leaf burning in Springfield. So things have changed. We didn't run cigarette ads in Illinois Times, mostly because nobody offered to buy any cigarette ads in Illinois Times. So, but then we needed the money, and this national group came around, and I think they wanted to run $5,000 worth of cigarette ads in the Illinois Times. So, well, we didn't police morality for the alcohol ads and the huge cars that people were buying, and So we ran a cigarette ad, and my friends came after me so hard on that. You know, Diane Hughes, oh, can you imagine? So we reinstated our policy of not running cigarette ads. And then finally, I remember marijuana was a thing back in the old days. It was illegal. Remember that? So there was a guy named Don, who lived in Rochester, and he organized a smoke-in and decided he was going to smoke marijuana in front of the Lincoln statue at the State House. And so it was on a holiday weekend, and I didn't think anybody was going to go, so I went to cover it. And all these people were there. It was huge. And sure enough, he lit up, and then all of a sudden, Alan Dixon was Secretary of State, and all these Secretary of State police lined up in front of the Capitol. And then they kind of said charge, and to arrest all these people on the State House grounds. And they chased them all the way down to the Lincoln home, and it was really exciting. So anyway, things have changed. We finally got through that.
All right. Well, we've got two kind of different views of things. Each of these guys had events. Randy mentioned the 50-year event for NPR Illinois, and I was lucky enough to be one of the 200 people, including Senator Durbin was there, for the Illinois Times 50th anniversary. But I'm going to ask you to look forward a little because part of what that was all about was a few things, and I'll summarize quickly. So the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln, and I'm on an advisory board to that. That's just one of the things, John. Got on the ground floor through John Stremstorfer and Stacy Reed of something called Press Forward, which is a $500 million, I think, 5-year program to enhance local journalism nationally. We were one of the first 6 chapters in the country here in Springfield through the Community Foundation. The former publisher of, the late publisher of the State Journal-Register, and the guy that hired me when he was managing editor, Pat Coburn, passed away a few years ago, left money to the Community Foundation. $1 million of that was put into a local journalism fund. The MacArthur Foundation, in a big event a couple of years ago at UIS, the head of it came to Springfield to announce they were matching the $1 million. There's been an ongoing study for several months by something called the American Journalism Project to determine how this money should be used. And a lot of surveying was done, many people were talked to, and what came out of this was it has to go to a not-for-profit, and sorry, yours is one, but Illinois Times is kind of chosen as the medium of choice at this point as being a trusted medium. And I know Steve Sperry is here, and I love the SJR and all the work you do, but you're not for profit. And Bud's paper is now converting to not-for-profit so that they can get money from the local journalism fund. And Bud, why don't you just explain kind of where that's going and what you can do as we look forward, and maybe a timetable for those changes.
I love the NPR slogan that I've heard lately, that we're defunded, but we're not defeated. Well, I'm hoping that we can be funded and not defeated, because it's going to bring some change. You know, I've never had a board before, and so I asked a friend, Bernie, to be on my board, because
I said yes,
despite
my roots of 30 years at the other paper.
less scary. But no, it's a good thing, and we've always been close to being nonprofit anyway. So I thought it wouldn't be much of a switch. But I'm learning, not only having a board, but having to apply to be a nonprofit. I thought it was a simple process because I heard Citizens Club did it, and it was pretty simple. Well, it turns out that Form 1023 or whatever it's called is not simple at all. And so I have to project a budget for the next 3 years, and man, I've never projected a budget for the next year, let alone 3 years. But anyway, it's going, and it's going to happen. And we've got approval at the state level, and soon we'll submit our paperwork to the IRS to get formally recognized as a 501c3. This will enable us. It will not only enable us to change, it will require us to change, because we have committed to more reporters. We have committed to digital newsmaking and recording, and so you can read us on your phone. You know, so there's a lot of change going on, which is scary, but it's what we need, and this will help us to do it.
Okay, and I'll go into the kind of questions from me phase, but given the changes that both of your organizations are undergoing, can you give us some, if you're able to, an idea of staffing level, like how many people you had 5 years ago, how many people you have now, how many people you hope to have, you know, coming up in the immediate future or maybe in the next 5 years? Randy, you want to go with that?
Sure. I think at our peak, after we merged with Illinois Issues, the public policy magazine, we had about 18 people in a newsroom of 8 reporters. It was great. Unfortunately, not sustainable with other cuts that happened over time. We got as low recently as 5, and that's been really a struggle. We're up to 7 right now and have 3 additional positions that are either posted right now or about to be posted at the university for reporters and producers. So 10 looks like where we're going to be for a little bit. Ideally, to be able to do everything smoothly, we'd be at 20.
Understood. Bud?
When I first started at Illinois Times in 1977, there's a picture of me with the staff, and there's about 12 or 14 people standing around me, and that's about what we have now. The difference, we pay them now. They want salaries. So that's about where we are now. But reporters, we have had more in the past than we do now. We've got Dean Olson, who does the work of several people, and we've just hired a new reporter. But the plan is to grow that reporting staff to 3 next year, and then add 2 more in 27, and get all the way up to like 8 reporters. Can you imagine? I can't, but we'll get it done and see what it looks like after we get there.
Yeah, and a lot of the people that write for your paper now are freelancers, correct? And you'll continue to use those as well?
Absolutely, as long as they don't insist on being paid a lot of money. You know?
Okay.
But no, freelance gives us Karen Witter, who is remarkable, and I think she pays for her international trips by the money that she makes from Illinois Times.
And her sister Cinda's here too, and she's
Cinda does
writes for you all the time.
Had a cover story recently about history, and so I shouldn't start. I mean, there's lots of people that contribute, and we sure intend to keep that going. Another thing we're going to keep going is our print circulation. We print is, a lot of people ask us to make the type bigger, maybe some of you.
Do you anticipate continuing once a week in print?
Once a week in print and daily online.
Yeah, so there'll be more online with more staff. This next question really applies to both of you, but I'm going to go to Bud first with it, because you're getting this Press Forward funding sometime soon in the future. And how would each of you deal with the perception, true or not, that your outlets have a liberal slant? In other words, do you represent the area adequately? I think Illinois Times, I think the stories are fair and interesting, but I think there's been this thought. Am I right or wrong, and is it fair?
People have accused us of being liberal, and we always say, well, slightly to the left of John F. Kennedy, maybe. You know, my mother accused me of being liberal, and I said, Mom, you raised me in church. You know, I think I don't think we're very liberal. In fact, conservative used to be a way to be. You know, when I covered Governor Thompson, well, Bob Mandeville, the budget director, said, you know, we're a conservative outfit. We don't use general obligation bonds to pay for operating funds. Things like that was conservative. Environmentalism was conservative. So, yeah, we're conservative in a lot of ways.
Understood. Yeah, and obviously, Randy, NPR nationally, you know, has had some publicity about this with Uri Berliner stuff.
Yuri was an editor at NPR who, leaving to go report for a more conservative publication, wrote a treatise about NPR and estimated that there were no Republicans on staff. NPR responded, and NPR is not us, NPR is our national organization that we've all funded, and they're a huge resource to us. NPR responded that we don't ask people what their political affiliation is when they hire them. I think it's difficult in an era where facts are liberal to determine what is or isn't left or right. There's the Adfonts media chart that shows the depth of coverage that journalist organizations do and their left or right leaning. NPR pretty consistently is toward the top in depth and just much like Bud mentioned, a touch to the left, but not far off the center line at all compared to other organizations. We get complaints from both sides in general. Why are you reporting on Trump so much? Why are you giving this voice? Versus other folks going, how come you're reporting that you're just trying to make them look bad or things like that. I think selection bias is probably the biggest issue that we always have to worry about. We cover issues of identity and some people feel that that's liberal. We are a public radio station, public media. We think we have to cover everybody that we can possibly with our capacity, and that's why we're making sure we cover those stories. If we can do anything to do a better job, we're open to it. NPR, again, nationally, is one of the few organizations to have an ombudsman, or they now call it their public editor, and they accept questions all the time and investigate and write on why these types of things happen. So they do care about it.
Okay. Springfield area is home to lots and lots of government offices. So do each of your media outlets try to cover the city and the state, the schools, the county, townships? There's so many to pick from. How do you decide what to cover and how adequate is staff to get that job done? Randy, you want to go first with that?
I don't think there's any way any of us can have an adequate staff to cover all that needs to be covered. We have a couple people who overperform and have had to do a lot more reporting by phone out of the office because travel takes away time and capacity. Sean Crawford is one of those. We're currently hiring another position in the news department. We have Michelle Eccles, who is my sister, who is a longtime news person, used to be the news director at WTAX and then WSOY out in Decatur, who is on in the mornings. When it comes to deciding what to cover, they're looking at what the top stories are first, because sometimes that's as far as we can get. When we have the opportunity with Press Forward Illinois and the Community Foundation, both Illinois Times and us, along with Capital News Illinois, another nonprofit in the area, got grants, healing grants, to do some special coverage. We were able to hire a mom and her daughter to report on the Muslim community and what it's like to be Muslim in Central Illinois. And what we found out from that is that Illinois has the highest per capita Muslim population in the United States, among other things. So when we get opportunities like that as a nonprofit with grants, we're able to get more depth.
Bud, what kind of coverage?
Well, we've never tried to be a newspaper of record, but we always try to pick and choose and do a variety of stories. And when we cover the courts, we do it well when there's news in the courts. When we go to the State House, it's because there's something important happening there, and covering the State House can be really boring if you cover everything there. So that's the way a small paper does it, but we look forward to getting bigger, so because there's good stories everywhere. And, you know, I wanted to say that Citizens Club helps us figure out what's rising to the top. We've gotten a lot of good stories because the Citizens Club has organized the materials, brought in the speaker. We, you know, what this group thinks is important, we tend to think is important as well.
Very good. Do opinion pieces enter your coverage, and should they? I mean, I know there's an editor's note in each edition that Bud does, you know, what about public comment and letters to the editor? So I'll let Bud talk about that first, because we know you do some of this. And will that change if you're a not-for-profit? I guess you can't endorse candidates, but you don't do that anyway, as far as I recall.
Opinion's a big part of our paper, and we have what we call guest work, and that is like op-eds where people from the community write essays for us. We also have regular columnists that have strong opinions, and we think opinions is what matters. The letters to the editor, we get a healthy group of letters each time we write, and that's probably one of the most important and best read parts of the paper. So, yeah, opinion is, you know, and always when I write my opinion in there, I don't tell you what to think about, I tell you what to think, right?
Thank you for that. We're not as formally organized around opinion per se. We have published some opinion pieces from professors and different things. Really, where we get that out is in two ways. We encourage people to email us at engage@nprillinois.org with any feedback they have so we can assess how we're doing. But Community Voices has become the way we most are getting opinion out. Community Voices was designed not to necessarily be a news program, but to be able to let people come on the air and talk about life and talk about themselves and talk about what's going on. So sometimes that has some opinion with it, and other times it's just, you know, the way life is going.
By the way, the 21st is one of my favorites with Brian Mackey, who used to sit next to me at the SJR, so that's pretty cool. And State Week, of course, has Charlie Wheeler still doing that.
Read the bill.
Read the bill, and there's a little opinion on that show, and that's part of the deal, so that's pretty cool.
Some analysis, yeah, for sure.
With strong divisions among parties nationwide, how can you tell your reporters to fairly cover stories? Because people may have very strong opinions about one side or the other on what used to be two sides to a story, and now there's sometimes more than that.
I'd say, I mean, always look at the holistic aspect of the story, and if there's sort of a clear thrust to it, what's missing? What are the other pieces of it? And time is always an issue in reporting on how much you can find of that. Can you track down other opinions? Can you ask the other questions? But you can often get from the source that has the strong opinion what the other opinions are or the other facts are that can shape it. So yeah, we do the best we can to have credible stories. I think journalism occasionally gets the story one way early, and then it evolves and they have to adapt and make either corrections or update what's happening. So we do the best we can with that and continue to report and try to get as many voices as possible.
Well, there's always more than two sides to every story, and what we try to do with our reporting is do multi-source stories all the time. And mostly in local news, it's not, you know, one party or the other. It's like the labor unions and the non-labor unions and this and that. So it's important to see each story in a larger context, and that's the only way you get the truth out, is to get as many sources as you can.
Okay, I'm going to do one more quick question. How do you stay relevant as a print publication or a radio station when a lot of younger people are hooked on social media and get their information from their phones?
I guess I'll start. I mean, statistics say exactly that for the most part, people under 40 don't own radios now except for in their car. Even us as adults have learned very quickly that the on-demand media is the way we like it. The fact that now we can just tell Netflix or whatever streaming service you choose, I want to watch this now. that's becoming the new normal. So we've adapted by doing digital. We post all of our stories also on nprillinois.org. We have to focus on the idea that we also need pictures now, or graphics, which we didn't need in the past. We do podcasts. We stream. So, that phone in your hand is the number one device now for both reading news and listening to news. So we have to be there. I think, as Bud talks about being daily coming up, that's going to be probably part of it. And for us, it's the same thing. It gives us a lot more opportunity to touch base with people. And I think the way we look at it is we want to be available on whatever platform you demand.
Platforms are hard. It's easy to put out a weekly print newspaper when you've been doing it for 50 years. We've got that down. But switching to the phone, which we need to do, takes a lot of work and new thinking for us. But we need to be on all kinds of platforms. I heard that, I was recently on the 21st radio show. Man, I got a call from friend of mine in Chicago. I heard you on the radio.
Yeah.
Somebody in Champaign. I heard you on the radio.
Brian's on like 7 stations with that. Yeah, and you and Michelle did a nice job.
So anyway, we're trying to get out to mostly I think it's the content that will make a difference, and local news I think is what people want to know about, and I think even kids will come back around to local news if we do it right.
I'm going to turn things over now to audience questions, because I know nobody here would probably have a question, but maybe. And John Kelker will kind of lead the show on getting that done.
I'm looking in the back. Do I see Jim Donlin? I do. Jim Donlin has got a microphone. Quick questions. We've got about 15, 18 minutes, as many questions as we can get in. Make Jim work.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is for both of you. So, President of the United States has used the term fake news and recently called a journalist piggy. Have you, on a more local level, had any elected officials or prominent citizens make any disparaging remarks, threats, or comments to either one of your journalists or to your organizations? Oh, and by the way, if you want to name names, that's okay too.
I'll just say we have not. I think we're respected here, and this town respects the news, and name calling doesn't enter into it. If I haven't heard of name calling as a tactic for our local people. I think they figured out it doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I think the blessing there is we know each other, right? It's our community. But in this environment, it does continue to get, I think, tougher for reporters out there and media in general. You hear people put down the media all the time, and that's a broad term for all the different credible organizations and non-credible organizations that are out there. But no, we have not had any direct threats. We always have had some passionate people who have some expressed opinions at the highest altitude they can possibly make it, but no threats.
Is the quality of the journalism candidates coming out of school as good as it was 20 years ago?
There aren't very many journalists coming out of school, but the ones we get that we interview for the public affairs reporting program, internships are idealistic. And journalists don't come in here to see their bylines. They come in to change the world. And I think that kind of idealism that we started with is still there. And there'll be, once the jobs start coming back in journalism, well then the enrollees in journalism schools will continue to increase?
I think there are still really good journalists out there, but as Bud said, the pipeline is much less flow, many fewer people. And when we do get good people, it's hard to compete with public relations jobs that can pay significantly more than reporting can pay. Part of what we've tried to do to overcome that is we've started experimenting with something we call Journalism Corps, or J-Corps. I mentioned the mom and daughter who reported for us. That was our first trial of that. We have our second one coming up. We have a student who's working with us now who's going to work on a story. But the idea with that eventually is to find people in the community that we can give some journalism training to who want to take the time to report on things. Because there's no way we're going to hire enough people to get out there and do all the reporting. So we need to bring people up to speed to use the right journalistic standards to help the community know what's going on.
Yes, Steve Narduli. Joyce isn't here to chastise me for making a statement, but I wanted to thank Fletcher for the walk down memory lane. When Jim Edgar was appointed, I was retained to represent the Secretary of State Police in the fallout from the great marijuana smoke-in. Mr. Duda was, rather than asked to get out of his car, was pulled through the window by an investigator who was about 6'5", 250, a bodybuilder who would have been a good Jack Reacher stand-in. Rather than sit in front of a jury with this investigator, we ended up paying Mr. Duda $8,000, which is less than he deserved for having been yanked through a window rather than being asked to get out of the car.
It's good to have an old timer in the crowd.
And a judge.
Are there more questions? Please.
Steve, I can add to that story the investigator's name, if I could, it was Lance Charleston that pulled Duda out of the car. I represented him. So with that, Fletcher, Bud, I want to thank you for, again, that just the wonderful stories you told this morning. But one thing I want to say is I'm very glad that you're keeping the letters to the editor part of your newspaper, because I certainly missed that in the SJR. We read those stories, and they ranged from tin hat kookiness to very insightful and very, very knowledgeable. But what I think they did is they allowed the community to be a part of journalism. And I think that's very important, because that keeps people engaged. A couple weeks ago, on a Sunday, the lead article in the SJR was a story about this, the Menard County State's Attorney who was being investigated and charged with DUI. And the headline read that she was refused a breath test, which is a big difference from she refused a breath test. That makes the way the headline read made the police look really bad, because they refused her a test as opposed to the other way around. And I just really wanted to write a letter to the editor saying, come on, folks, that's just get it right. But I can't. And I didn't write it for the...
I'll take it.
Okay. But you got to get that stuff right. And I think that is, part of the public being involved in journalism is holding the paper accountable for mistakes like that, and but to be a part of that journalistic process. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Peter, I just wanted to tell you that Lance Charles was a friend of mine because he was one of the security for Mike Hallett when Hallett was running for governor. And one time, Hallett got upset with something I had written about him, and he just lit into me, Mike Hallett, and told me I was a terrible person. And so after Hallett was out of the earshot, well, Lance Charles came up to me and said, "You didn't deserve that." So I've been a friend of Lance all along.
As far as the term accountability was just raised by the previous gentleman, when you look at not only nationally but even locally, it's kind of the wild, wild west on the internet. Anybody can put up a Facebook page and tout this, that, and the other. How do organizations like yours going forward, with this room, I think people understand the difference, but the average person out there, when you hear, oh, I saw in 217 Problems, to call in an example, they had this story and they really reported it, nobody else did. How do you get around that? Because obviously a lot of those groups out there on the internet, they don't subscribe to the same journalistic standards or have journalistic standards. They just throw stuff out there. I think there's another Springfield Leaks, for example, that some of the stuff that gets reported on there, if you guys did that, you'd get sued.
Yeah, media literacy, they've talked about needing more of it in high schools. We all need it on a regular basis. We have to understand what these sources are that we're reading in social media, that they're unfiltered. It used to be considered a bad thing that we were gatekeepers, but now I understand what that is. We were making sure we're using journalistic practices to make sure you were getting credible information. And a lot of times these places are repeating something, and sometimes it's a valid thing they heard on police radio, but with no context. So media literacy means who wrote it, do they have a history of writing credible information, who have they talked to, do they have an angle, all those things, learning those things and practice them. I get caught, I'll read something and I'll start going, oh, wait, this is too good to be true. You know what, I think I better look into this one a little bit. And sure enough, I was watching a short video last night. I went, no, this can't be right. This has got to be sort of an AI thing. And sure enough, it was. So we all are now responsible for that, whereas we used to trust the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the SJR, the Illinois Times to do that work.
Well, we read Springfield Leaks, and we read the other stuff, at least Michelle does. Michelle Ownby, are you here? Michelle, yeah, Michelle's the editor of Illinois Times for all practical purposes, and she uses Facebook as a source, but she curates it. She compares it to the truth, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. So it can be a good source if you take it with a grain of salt, like everything else.
My question is for Bud, Karen Witter. How much do you know who your readership actually is? And what I found really interesting when I started freelance writing, I had people who had no idea I wrote, never read the articles, and then I had people that would stop me on the street and say something about what they had read. And it was clear to me the people who were not reading the article, I could tell a lot about their politics because of the perception that Illinois Times is the liberal, and so they never read it. I could tell people's politics just from whether they had read Illinois Times or not. However, now, as Illinois Times has become the go-to newspaper, and people like Jim Edgar and Al Grosball would say, hey, did you ever think that we would be looking to Illinois Times for our major news? So I'm just curious how much you know about your readership and what your distribution is of the paper.
We don't take readership surveys, at least not very often. Mostly we write what we think, and we publish what we think is good reporting. Jim Edgar used to think we were communist almost, but super liberal, but he was so brave that when he was elected governor, he invited us to interview, his very first interview after he was elected governor, to reach out to the other side. I don't think we know very much about our readership, except that they're all good people, and if they read us, they're our friends. We do. A lot of times I publish something and Michelle will tell me, well, that's going to get a lot of letters to the editor. And it doesn't, because most of the people that don't like what I write stopped reading me a long time ago. So anyway.
Yeah, I repeat the question.
Oh, they were just talking about, do you know who your audience is?
We have about 30,000 people who listen to us in a week. Our website has well over 1 million users in a year. The interesting thing about our web traffic is that we have more people using it in Chicago than we do in Springfield, just because there's more population there. Springfield is right behind that. But because we're in the state capital, I think a lot of people want to drop in and see what's happening. And so we have a good audience back. This is not a rated market anymore. Nielsen, Arbitron used to rate this market. The stations don't pay for that research anymore, but there is a drop-in report that's done occasionally. That's where those 30,000 numbers come from. And back when they used to do a more robust survey, NPR Illinois was always one of the top 1, 2, or 3 stations in the market. So it definitely has a listenership.
Norm Sims, you guys have done an admirable job talking about where you are, where you've been, and the forces affecting you now. I'm curious about, from your point of view, what you think the future holds for the legacy media.
I hate to be called the legacy media, but I think news is going to be important from now on, and I think local news is where our future lies. You know, we like to think that anything that happens in Springfield is worth reporting, and we try to localize national news whenever there's, you know, there are Jewish people in Springfield that can talk to us about the Middle East, and there's Palestinians in Springfield, so we can report on local news and have it go nationally. We can also nationalize local news. My daughter in New Jersey texted me this morning and said, "Hey, I just heard on NPR that the Women's Professional Baseball League is going to play its first season in Springfield." I said, wow.
I think the future of the media is still necessary and strong, but it is much like when we went from broadcast TV to cable and it fractionalized. There are so many sources and opportunities for you now. But we're necessary to a democracy. The research that like Tim Franklin and others have shown is that when there is not journalism happening, credible journalism to hold government accountable, more corruption happens, things don't get done. So there's a need for it going forward, and I think people like Bud and us and many others are trying to figure out how to keep this vibrant and useful, and ultimately it's going to be yours to decide whether it's useful for you or not.
We have time for one more question.
I just thought of one more answer to Norm's question, and that is things can change. I just remembered with all my spouting off, you know, I own the place, I run the place, but I got a board member sitting here, and he may have other ideas. We'll change as we go along.
I'll keep thinking.
So when I like tell people that I'm like aspiring journalist, I think they're like shocked in a way. And just recently I was talking with someone and I was saying how I'm looking more into like PR jobs and marketing. And they've said like that's really cool, and they asked me like if I worked at publications, and then they said you should stay like in the PR and that side, because AI is going to have the info world is going to have like more value, just like, you know, in the future. So I was like wondering your guys' thoughts on those like, you know, topics, like, and like fake news, AI, like how do you think like you can have better media literacy in schools and other places to protect that, and, you know, also use that in a good way, because it can be used in a good way.
We had somebody on Community Voices recently who told us that not learning AI is like not learning to drive. So how are you going to get around in the future? The question is how we decide to deploy it and what guidelines we put in place. We disclose anytime we've used AI, so if there's a graphic that was generated by AI, we put, you know, generated by whatever it was. And then we hear from artists going, well, you just took some money from me. And it's like, well, we wouldn't have found that money otherwise, so we needed a graphic and we used it, plus we do at some level pay an organization, Adobe in this case, that is paying for the base art. It does help with some efficiencies. We have to transcribe things now for ADA compliance, and so That can take a long time to take a 20-minute interview and transcribe it. We can feed it to AI, and it'll do that within a minute or so, and then we spend another probably hour editing it to make sure that it's right. So there are ways that AI helps. I think I see it sort of frustratingly for some people now on social media, if you're part of a group, generating questions to try to stimulate engagement. I don't know that that's wrong, but it seems sort of forced. So it's a continuing thing to watch. The latest stuff I've seen is not just in journalism, but all over the place. It's going to really transform what jobs are available, and we're going to have to keep an eye on it.
We use it very carefully, and I see in another newspaper in town that AI generated stories and they're not very good. So maybe AI will get better.
Everybody's trying to get better, and I was extremely scared of AI and the idea that it would generate news, and I think if it's not looked over by an editor, it's not a good thing. And some of those stories in the SJR where it says there's a reporter that they've hired in another state, I think, who uses AI to help generate some stories. And some of them are pretty basic rewrites of press releases, and you hope it's accurate, but editors are very important. As you said, they have to be, looked at, curated, made sure that it's correct.
Thank you. How about a round of applause for Bernie, Fletcher, and Randy? Very interesting and wonderful old stories. Our next Friday morning program is December 19th. We will be led by Mark Hanna with a panel discussion about what's going on at the Abraham Lincoln Capitol Airport. Thank you for joining us this morning. Have a wonderful weekend and a happy Thanksgiving.